You're listening to Crushing Club Marketing with Ed Heil. Today, we're checking in with Derek Sussner, owner of Sussner Design Company. Sussner Design specializes in refreshing identities for brands. Derek and his team have worked with athletic-focused brands like Shock Doctor, Cutters Sports, and McDavid USA. And on top of that, Derek is an avid golfer and has a deep appreciation for the strength of a club's brand. This episode is brought to you by Storyteller Media and Communications, an inbound marketing agency that's helping clubs crush their marketing. So Derek, just because you can't see, Derek is wearing a Wolf Creek, what do you call it? Quarter inch, three-quarter inch, whatever, pullover.
Yes.
How's that?
Zippy.
Fashion police here.
Yeah.
Is Wolf Creek a golf club?
Wolf Creek is a golf club in Mesquite, Nevada. I think from the tips, which I did not play, I think it has the highest slope and rating of any golf course in the United States.
Oh, wow.
Potentially.
Yes. Yeah. So you didn't play the forward tees, though, did you?
Did not play the forward tees, played the middle tees, actually scored pretty well the second time I played it. Your first time there, you're more focused on not falling off the back of the tee to your death.
That'd be a bad thing in that case.
It's phenomenal. I highly suggest a trip there.
Hey, thanks for being with us today. Just a real quick background on Sussner Design.
Sure. Sussner Design focuses on helping companies differentiate themselves. We're an identity-based graphic design firm that leverages a process to help companies refresh their brand positioning, their brand messaging, their identity, all leading to, ideally, a better customer experience.
Awesome. So branding is one of those things for a lot of people that sort of can feel really esoteric and kind of out there. How do you define branding at Sussner?
I'm going to steal a quote from Jim Collins. I just read Good to Great recently, and he defines your brand as, quote unquote, your reputation. So ad agencies might discuss branding from an advertising standpoint. Marketing companies talk about it from a marketing angle. We talk about it from an identity standpoint. It's who you are, it's what you sound like, and what people often say is it's your look and feel.
Mm-hmm. And is there good branding? Is there bad branding? How do you define really good branding?
It's a great question. Sometimes I think it's almost easier to find what's bad than what's good. But I think what's bad is something that's not working. There are some indicators that will happen to show that it's not working.
Like what? Like what do you? Yeah.
Complaints. If you want to talk about your customers are complaining about it, it could be the retailers that your product is sold in or the space that you're in. It could be getting crushed by your competition, your direct competition, because they are talking about what they do better than what you are. So I should clarify that from a brand standpoint and an identity standpoint, the message that you're speaking is every bit and possibly more important than the logo, for example. So if you're not articulating who you are and identifying who your target customer or market is, or person or individual that you're trying to talk to, they will define who you are for you.
And that may not always be a good thing, obviously.
No, I think our brains are really programmed just through evolution to understand things as quickly as possible, to spend as few mental calories as possible when identifying what's going on, really with the least amount of effort. So I think people have an inclination to put things in a box as they understand them. It makes it more comfortable to them. That's food, that box is shelter, that box is golf, etc. The challenge is if you don't define who you are in a way that people can clearly understand what that is, they will define it for you. They want to put you in that box.
So I think a lot of people, the first thought of brand is a logo. And that's a really important part of it, right? I mean, it's like, that's like your first impression. But that's not everything with defining a brand. Can you talk a little bit more about what are the different factors that go into developing a really strong brand.
Absolutely, and you're right on. Logo really minimalizes it to just one of many tactics that are really important in a package of elements that create your brand. So your brand is really in that reputation piece. It's everything and anything that your target market interacts with, whether you're present or not. Starbucks is a great example, or any coffee shop really, because they'll drill down to the music that's playing in the background that affects your perception as you walk into that store, how you're greeted, what it smells like, what the sounds are, coffee percolating, chatter in the corner, and you contrast that with a poor greeting, a terrible smell, no smell, an empty vacant sound, and no customers, and that's two completely different brand experiences. Mm-hmm. So I think some of the key elements that a lot of people tend to overlook when they jump right to the logo that gets embroidered on the front shirt of your shirt or your zippy, as I'm wearing, it's the foundational positioning and messaging and understanding what your company is. For some people, this will go as far as core values, mission, vision, both internally and externally appropriate. Oftentimes, then that should translate to the messaging and how you talk to your customers. I have a fun conversation with a copywriter friend of mine from time to time where I pick on him and say, nobody reads your copy unless the designer makes it look good. But he'll spin it back to me and say, well, no matter how good it looks, if I spend the time to read it and I don't understand what it says or it doesn't communicate to me, then you've missed your mark there also.
So you're both right.
Yes.
Really.
I think so.
Ultimately, it's like let's agree to, own our own part of it.
Call it truce.
So what's interesting, though, to me from a club perspective, I mean, with retail or, in a lot of B2C environments where it just seems like brand is so critical, you're trying to appeal and send a message to people who may not even know you, right? And yet with clubs, in the club industry, these are people that it's a tribe, right? And it's almost like, in some ways, isn't your brand like a statement of who you are and what you believe? And, how is it different for a club than it is? Or is it really the same thing? And, I think I know you're going to say it's the same thing.
I think it's exactly the same. And I think that clubs can learn a tremendous amount by looking at what other businesses are doing. They have the exact same challenges. There are people that are associated with driving a certain brand of car that would never consider driving another brand of car because they don't associate themselves with that tribe. And we all, I think, inherently, going back to the evolution comment, I think we all inherently want to be part of a tribe of some sort. It's just then figuring out or identifying which parts of which tribe make sense for us and excite us and that we want to be a part of, and creating that. So then, much like a business does in their consumer product, to try to figure out how to speak to you as the potential buyer or as the potential member, to not only figure out what language will attract you and connect with you, it's also what language will energize you and what sort of call to action will start the process of us communicating with each other and talking with each other.
Right. So one of the things that a lot of clubs struggle with is a lot of clubs want to get younger. And they talk about having an older demographic, an older membership, and they want to appeal to a younger audience. And yet they have a very, they'll also say, but we have great tradition here. And so it would seem that some clubs really struggle with changing their branding and maybe more specifically changing their logo first. And we can cover the rest of that later. But how do you recommend a club who's saying, gosh, we want to honor tradition, but man, we got to get younger. And they've got the crest as their logo and some of that other stuff, or maybe it's not, but it just looks old. How do you do that?
From a process standpoint, I think there are a handful of steps that are not rocket science by any means, but there are a handful of simple steps to go through that would help identify what some of the key indicators are to get there. And we can talk about that process in more depth too. Without, I don't want to bore all your listeners.
No, but I think that if there's some tips that you can share that, or things that if you say look for these signs, then that would be helpful.
Well, I think a couple of key steps that a club could do would really be to survey both the members and non-members, if they can gather a handful of those that are in that prospective audience. There are thousands or hundreds of thousands of companies in the United States alone that have brands that have this exact same challenge. Brands that have been around for a very long time, that are really looking to maintain the foundation of their tradition and leverage the equity that they have in goodwill and recognition, but also update it in a thoughtfully way that attracts a new audience.
Right.
When it comes to clubs, that might just simply be removing the crest behind the logo. But when you look at quote unquote stereotypical club logos, they look like monograms. And in many respects, they all look the same.
So when you say monograms, like, what is that?
It's your initial and a crest.
Yep.
EH, Ed Heil, like you probably
EHCC.
Exactly. Bushwood Country Club, right?
Exactly. My God. So just one of the things you just mentioned there that I wanted to explore a little bit more, it's almost like the idea of a focus group where you say, go to members who represent that demographic that you're going after. So that's something that'd be really easy to do for a club to say. Now, does that start, Derek, with what do you think of our current logo? Or is it we have 5 different logos, react to them, or is it both?
Both. You could really set it up. You could start it way up front and have discussions with other companies, with other club logos or other brand logos that even have a similar vibe. You could take the Cadillac, for example. You could take the Cadillac logo from 7 or 8 years ago that had the iconic laurel branches surrounding the shield and compare that to what they've recently done with it, which was simply to remove those laurel branches and have a discussion about side by side, what are the perceptions and words and attributes that come to mind in describing those two. So without asking necessarily for the specific answer of what should we do, it's using somebody else's relevant examples to see how people are reacting to them.
So sometimes this can feel really risky for clubs too, though, and they go, I don't know. And to your point, let's not make a bad decision. Let's not have something that we end up with that's going to miss fire for us. Hazeltine National Golf Club in Chaska, Minnesota, a couple of years ago changed their logo. They went from a crest, a traditional, old school crest, and they went to this figure. It's like,
golfer with the bag over his
shoulder.
shoulder.
The walking man.
Yeah.
And it seems like it's working for them. I don't know if they hired anyone to do that, but what are the risks in such a drastic change?
I don't think there are any. The biggest risk would be disenfranchising your current membership. So I think if you have the opportunity to involve them through the process, to survey them, to gather their insights, to make sure I'm assuming on a club level there's a board or a group of people that are pushing this through or shepherding it through, to make sure that you understand what the goals are. One of the exercises that we often do is called a desired brand attributes exercise. And it's a series of maybe 50 slides that contrast 2 words. And we'll take that through with the key leadership team and in a very intuitive and relatively quick way say, does Hazeltine National want to be perceived, not in the market, but to your target market? Those are 2 different things. How do you want to be perceived by the general public when we're on TV at the Ryder Cup? That's one thing. But how do you want to be perceived by the person who's considering joining your club? And it's also not how are we perceived today. That's a separate exercise. And once you go through these series of words, which sometimes there's some redundancies that similar words are used against other words, just to try to, in the end, draw out a list of 8 or 10 words that says, when you combine all these together, this is what we want to look like and sound like and feel like. And that's a great guide in moving forward into the creative process.
So just as a point of clarification, what I'm kind of hearing something that I think could be confusing, which is the message that you send to prospective members or to your membership with your brand. Is it okay if it's different than what you send to the general public, or do you really want that to be consistent?
Ideally, it's consistent. Ideally, it's one unified message that defines who you are, differentiates you from your competition or anybody else that might be similar, and cuts through the clutter and appeals to the specific audience that you've identified as your target, which includes your current membership.
Right. And that can be so hard too, though, because people might interpret it totally differently, right? And so in some ways, by having a brand that, I don't know, a brand that's, the word that comes to mind is flexible. Mm-hmm. But it brings you maybe to the same basic place. Does that happen? I mean, is it possible to have a brand that's like, well, if you're not a member here, like just say, I saw your club on TV and it looks like you stand for this. Might be a little bit of an interpretation of what the members see it as, but it's all kind of close or good, or would that just be a big disconnect? Like, well, people on TV should see the same thing that people inside the building see.
I think, you have internal language and you have external language. So just like in your business, there are messages that you might have on the wall that you might share with your employees that drive your internal culture that maybe aren't articulated or wordsmithed in the same way you would say in the public, but I think the essence is the same. I think that all of those are the foundation of your personality as you've chosen to define it. Also, I don't think keep in mind the logo is just one of many efforts that go into supporting this effort and defining who you are. So the logo is very, very important for sure, but when it doesn't work on its own.
Yeah.
It's going to be combined with messaging. When people visit your website, you have an opportunity to use imagery and additional information and messages to bring your brand personality to life.
So that's a great segue. And what I'm hoping we can talk a little bit more about is the importance of carrying whatever that brand identity is through everything that you do at your club. And you talked about smell, you talked about, visual sensory experiences. How I would imagine there are probably a lot of clubs who say we're doing the logo and they're done with their branding. How important is it, though, that it's all connected, even down to how people are served at the club and how members are treated?
It's critical. It's everything. Like I said earlier, it's every single opportunity that you have to connect with people on a human level, all wrapped up, creates your brand and your reputation. If you have the coolest logo in the world, but your customer service is substandard, then that's the impression that you're going to leave. Mm-hmm. If you have a great logo and looks great on a shirt, and your golf course is state-of-the-art, world-renowned, or your club has a phenomenal reputation for food or service or membership or what have you, but the valet out front loses your car keys, that's going to be a lasting part of your perception of that club.
Mm-hmm. So at the heart of this, really, it's and you see this sometimes, is a lack of identity. Like the club doesn't even know who they are. I mean, there are some clubs that I've met with that will say, geez, we're not sure if we're a family club or not a family club, and it starts with really knowing who you are, doesn't it?
Jack of all trades, master of none. If you, like I said, if you don't choose to define who you are, then other people will define it for you. For a club that's poorly defined, whose brand isn't clear, like the ones you just mentioned, I would venture to guess that if you surveyed 10 different people who all are prospects of that club, some of those 10 will have visited, some of those 10 may have friends that are members. Some of those 10 have never experienced that club but have heard of it. I would venture to say you're probably going to get 7 or 8 completely different descriptions of who that club is and what they stand for.
Yeah, that's not so good.
Yeah.
So let's bring this online. How have websites changed over the last, if you think about the acceleration of mobile technology and people searching for things online, how has online changed branding? Has it changed branding? Is it just another place to emphasize the brand? What are your thoughts around that?
I think websites have changed from I want to have one to I need to have one. A sales consultant that I work with said that your website should be your very best, most successful salesperson. It works 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, year-round, and it does it without you or anyone else being present. And given the technology and the ability to update it frequently, as you learn how people are reacting to what's working and what isn't working, it's critical.
How difficult is that to really dial in a brand online?
I don't think it's difficult at all. I think if you follow the steps of some of the process that we talked about, once you have an identity, a logo, brand messaging, colors, great imagery of your club, and a well-articulated description of what's going on inside and who you are, it's then just a matter of bringing it all together in one place. In the old days, this would have been a brochure, and it could be, but what that brochure didn't do was capture my email or my phone number or create a strong enough call to action to make it, well, a brochure may have had a call to action, but a call to action on the website makes it so much easier for you as a club to interface and interact and capture my attention.
Mm-hmm. So clubs that, there are a lot of clubs out there that need new websites. I mean, probably, as you've noticed, as someone who appreciates getting out and is a golfer, at least seeing a lot of different golf clubs. Given that, a lot of clubs will say, geez, we need a new website. And they go, we'll put our logo on it and, in some pictures and keep going. How much, obviously you can do that. What would be some of the biggest things for people to be aware of that, as they go through that process is from a branding perspective? I mean, it's that idea of like, yeah, well, we know what our logo is. We know the font we use. We have our style, our colors that we use. What are some other things experientially that the club should be aware of as it relates to their brand and their websites?
Well, I think there's a couple of main goals and objectives for the website for a club. My perception is one of those goals is to support the membership, to give the member access to information, what's going on, when is it happening, give me the information.
Right. And engagement is such a big
sure.
part of, right? Yeah.
And then the second part or opportunity with that site is to generate leads for new prospects. I spent some time the other day looking at some of the private, just golf clubs alone, just using golf as a example. There are approximately 32 private golf courses in the Twin Cities alone. And I think I looked at about half of their websites. And so if I looked at 16 websites of private country clubs in the Twin Cities, 3 of them kicked ass. 3 of them were embarrassing. And the rest of them were nondescript, and I couldn't tell the difference between one to the next.
Interesting. So there's opportunity out there.
I think it's a very easy, low-hanging fruit, and an easy, relatively, I would argue, inexpensive investment to engage both your members and your prospects.
Yeah. Let's talk about just welcoming people into the website a little bit as well. Historically, and there's still a lot of clubs out there who do this, whether they're golf clubs or other clubs, where you hit their URL and you can't go anywhere. I mean, you've got to have a login or something, and There might be a drop down, a little navigation, so you can look at a couple things. But it's basically saying we're private, and if you want to look at what we have, you got to have access. In today's world, they're just screwing people. They're screwing themselves over in some ways, aren't they?
You know, as an example, and I won't name names, but this last summer I had the opportunity to play golf at a very well-respected, highly regarded club here in the Twin Cities. So ahead of time, just to make sure that I was aware of what some club policies were, I went online, went to the website. My goal was to actually see a scorecard so I could get a sense of what the golf course would play like. Because their golf course is not on my GPS app that I have on my phone. And the website looked as if it was, and it probably was. It was probably designed 15 years ago, and hasn't been touched since. The photography hasn't been updated, and there were maybe 2 photographs. There were 3 buttons. There was a home button, which is where I already was when I showed up on the site. There was a member login button, and there was a guest button. And so when I clicked on the guest button, there were directions and rules and regulations, most of which talked more about the things that were absolutely prohibited on the course than what was encouraged or inviting. So it was a exclusive experience. It was not inviting or inspiring at all.
So let's face it, some clubs, hang their hat on the fact that we're exclusive and we are not going to share anything, and that's part of the mystique or whatever of the club. Given the way the club industry has gone, I have got to believe there are fewer of those, but they absolutely exist, which is nuts. What I'm wondering though is how are there some examples of some websites that you've seen that people who are listening to the podcast could go and check out to see an example of what you would consider to be a website that aligns with brand, that is really engaging and draws people in?
Sure. One that I came across yesterday was Edina Country Club. Of the handful of, again, Twin Cities golf club websites that I looked at, they crushed it. Nod to the name of your podcast.
Oh, thanks, man. I appreciate it.
We talked offline about examples of other resorts or hotels or restaurants that want to be perceived or want to reinforce the exclusivity of their brand, but at the same time invite me to engage with them if I'm a prospective member. I had a conversation with a golf club in Florida recently who is considering rebranding, and there are usually a handful of reasons why that comes up in the first place. Membership's lagging, so they're looking for members. They're getting beat up by their competition. People are joining other clubs. They're going to other restaurants. Sales have slowed or plateaued in some way. Or the industry's changed. They've realized they need to target a millennial target market instead of the baby boomers, and they're trying to figure out what that shift is. So I tried to drill down to find out which one of those reasons provoked the phone call I had with this. It was a golf club community, and the response with the woman I spoke with was that none of those were her issues. They had substantial waiting lists for membership. All the properties in their club were sold. And what they were trying to do was simply to maintain the position of leadership and separation from their nearest competitor and protect themselves as the leader in that market. Mm-hmm. And it was one of the more refreshing, proactive, forward-thinking clubs that I've ever spoken to.
Yeah, and that is interesting because I think that in some ways, I'll back out of this because it was going to go back down the wrong path. It's interesting though because some of the things that you also hear from clubs is engagement. We're good with new members. We've got a waiting list, but what we're really trying to do is get more of our existing members to participate in more events and be more engaged with the club. Is branding how important is that for those kind of situations?
Oh, it's massive. We've seen, again, talking about business examples, I've seen companies that were 30 years old that in readdressing their 30-year-old brand that hadn't been touched or addressed in 30 years and having that new logo and updated color palette come to life on clothing, on the walls inside their spaces, in that environment, completely rejuvenated the attitude and the energy of everybody inside that space. Just like renovating your kitchen, and getting, a new dishwasher and brighter, cleaner paint job makes a massive amount of difference.
Yeah, interesting. I want to go back to something you had mentioned a couple of minutes ago about the club in Florida and and what their objectives are. And you talked about engaging millennials. And what I think is sort of an interesting thing that you hear from time to time is that we want to engage clubs that want to engage millennials, but they don't want to ostracize the baby boomers because they make up, such a, decent chunk of their membership. How do you handle that? I mean, is that like, and if it's not if there's no branding answer, I mean, sometimes, in a way it's like, is that just change management that the clubs have to learn how to manage? Or is there a way you can walk that line to say, hey, this is for the young and for the more experienced?
I think there's absolutely a way to do that. Going back to the Edina Country Club website example, the first thing you're greeted with isn't a member login button like the other website that I mentioned, but instead so this site is current, it's contemporary, it's responsive, meaning that it works on my mobile device, which is how the millennial is going to be looking at your website. It works on my desktop computer at work, and it works on my tablet. So it's moving and reformatting functionally and seamlessly. The second thing that it did is presented me with a giant, beautiful photograph on the homepage. It was very ethereal, which was what they're looking for. And the first word that came up in a provocative scrolling line of copy was family. So then it followed with premier, fun, and membership. So I would argue that family, premier, fun, and membership is relevant to the millennial who's looking to join, and to the baby boomer who's looking to join, and to the baby boomer who's looking to keep his club or her club relevant so that it stays healthy.
Right. Interesting. So in some cases, just positioning, choice of words, images that are used that.
Yep.
Yeah. Interesting. So let's leave some folks with some things that they can think about, and maybe some tips and advice for them. For clubs that are looking at their brand and feeling like, you know what, I know we can do better. Where should they start? How could they start? What do you think is the some easy things for people to act on, or at least to explore?
Well, the first thing I would ask is, how old is their website? One more golf analogy. I would ask you, how often do you upgrade the driver in your golf bag? If the driver in your golf bag is more than 4 or 5 years old, then it's not using the current technology.
So let me just stop in that really quickly, and I know this is a little ADD, but people say, like, we updated our website a few years ago. Within 2 years, we did it again, and internally, everyone's like, "Well, we got to do it because it's technology is changing." There are a lot of people that are going to say, whoa. Every 5 years, we should be looking at our branding. Are you kidding? We've had this logo for the last 50 years, and now you're saying every 5 years. Why do you think it's more important today that we evaluate things, on a shorter interval?
Well, I think the general mindset and approach has changed largely in part due to the changing technology, which makes it easier to react and update more often. And secondly, it's the change in the people and the demographic, and what they want and how they live. A logo that was designed, or a brand that was created like 3M, so long ago, didn't need to change very often because of where their target market interacted with that logo, how they interacted with it, on printed materials that needed to last a very, very long time. One of the challenges that I think clubs have when you say, we just did this 2 years ago, is first of all, let's look at it as an investment, not at an expense. If the cost in updating your website brings you 1 new member or 2 new members, you've paid for that entire cost. So it's completely an investment. And I would also say that while you should be looking at your website at a minimum of every 5 years, the benefit of making that investment is it does last 5 years. So amortize the investment of a new website over 5 years and an updated logo over 10 years, and it really isn't that much of a cost at all.
Yeah. All right. So I interrupted you before. You were going down the tips, and the first thing you said was let's take a look at the website. And I don't want to bail on our promise to our listeners.
Well, so the second thing is following up on looking at this as an investment, not as an expense, is to look at your messaging. I think when it comes to a logo refinement, if you choose to go that route, that can be done very, very minor, much like Cadillac, removing the laurel leaves around the side of the crest or taking the logo out of the crest. It can be a very minor, it doesn't have to be a brand new overhaul. And that's a great way to give recognition and a nod to the older membership regarding the tradition that this club has experienced, but yet modernizing it just a little bit, making it a little bit more contemporary and possibly even a little bit more easy to embroider on your shirt with a little less elements.
Yeah. Awesome. I want to break up the mojo here.
And then, like I said, I think the messaging is key. And it's as simple as determining who your target market is, who is the hero in your story, for example, what that person is looking for, what the club offers to help them, and a little bit of a taste of what life might look like if I decide to become a member at your club, and that might be enough.
Yeah. So really helping the people envision what it would look like for them. You know what's interesting is you brought up the Cadillac example a few times, and as I've been thinking about their whole positioning with how their commercials primarily, that brand feels so much more masculine, and yet I didn't ever notice the changes to the logo. I mean, you talk about the stuff on the side?
Yeah, laurels.
The laurels, right?
The little leafy thingies.
It's fancy.
Design elements.
Yeah. So, design elements. And so just tweaking to your point that you can take something that's really traditional, make a really minor change, and it feels like, in their case, it just feels more robust, and it definitely feels, to me at least, more masculine than what they used to have.
And that's what a design expert's going to help you with. Another example that brings in an entirely different way is Johnny Walker. So we think of the very masculine, high-end Scotch brand with the man walking, the iconic man. They recently introduced a brand new brand called Jane Walker, a new female counterpart to their current masculine logo and mascot. So they would much more drastic that way.
Is that risky?
I think any sense of marketing is a little bit risky, but if they've done the research and they've identified that as a target market and an opportunity, and it's probably the same Scotch in a different label and a different bottle, that's not too risky.
Yeah, Jane.
Yeah.
Here's to Jane Walker.
Cheers.
Derek Sussner, thanks for coming in and helping us crush club marketing today.
Thanks for having me, Ed. It's fun.
All right, man.
Let's do it again.
Thanks for hanging out with us today. Next week, we'll talk to Jackie Singleton. Officially, she's the Communications and Technology Director at the Country Club at Brookline. She, along with her team, has done a terrific job of flipping their internal communications through storytelling. You'll want to hear what Jackie has to say, and until then, keep on crushing your club's marketing.